Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Tips for Facilitating Successful Virtual IEP Meetings During COVID and Beyond. Today's webinar is hosted by the Progress Center, an OSEP-funded center aimed at promoting progress for students with disabilities. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the center's website, promotingprogress.org. Accessible handouts for today's session are also available in the Handouts section of the panel on your right-hand side. You will also see a link to closed captioning in the chat box. All of participants will be muted throughout the presentation. However, you may submit a question at any time into the question pod, which looks like the image shown here. If you have technical questions or issues, a webinar team member will try to assist you as soon as possible. However, if you have some content-related questions, there will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so we will save those and share them with our presenters. So my name is Dr. Tessie Rose Bailey, and I'm the director of the Progress Center and principal consultant at the American Institutes for Research. I'm pleased to serve as the webinar facilitator today and introduce our speakers. Our first guest is Emily Surapaneni. She is a special education process coordinator for Columbia Public Schools in Columbia, Missouri. Her current role focuses on improving and implementing processes related to paperwork and instruction, as well as supporting special education teachers at the elementary and middle school levels. Her previous experience includes 5 years of teaching elementary and middle school elementary students in the mild moderate disabilities, as well as additional 3 years mentoring first-year special education teachers pursuing master's degree at the University of Missouri. I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Kevin Rubenstein, Assistant Superintendent for Student Services in Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205. His district serves approximately 8,800 students in pre-K through transition in the western suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. In this role, he oversees all aspects of special education, Section 504 programming, MTSS, and response to intervention. In addition to his work with the district, Dr. Rubenstein is past president of the Illinois Alliance of Administrators of Special Education, the chair of the Policy and Legislative Committee for the Council for Administrators of Special Education, and a member of the Policy Steering Committee for the Council for Exceptional Children. And many of you may have heard him speak last week. So we'd like to start off today's session with a brief poll. And so I'd like you to take a moment to respond to the poll question, and it's really about letting us know what your current experiences with virtual IEP meetings are. So we will get that launched. Right. And so as you are completing the poll, I just want to remind folks that there are handouts. They're located in the handout in the right-hand side on your panel. And that you can submit questions for our presenters at any time during the session. Okay, we'll give you just a couple more seconds. All right, so let's close our poll. And Lauren, can you give us a sense about what you see in terms of folks' experiences with our virtual IEPs?
Sure. So it looks like 68%, the vast majority, selected participated in several, 10% selected participated in one, 7% selected participated or planning for future meetings, and 16% selected no experience.
Great. So we have quite a mixture of experiences in our session today. For those of you who have done a lot of virtual IEP meetings, I recommend sharing some of your tips and tricks. And at the end of today's session, I'll have a place where you can share those on our social media so that other folks can benefit from your experiences. Okay. Well, I'm pleased to really introduce the Progress Center, which is hosting this webinar. The Progress Center provides information, resources, tools, technical assistance services to really support local educators in developing and implementing high-quality educational programs that enable students with disabilities to make progress and meet challenging goals. And the way we do this is we share guidance, tools, resources that are based on existing research, state and federal law and policies, and like today, local experiences. Beginning in our second year, which starts in about a month, we will be partnering with local educators to really begin our local implementation of this work. Now, the center focuses on promoting progress through the development and implementation of high-quality educational programming. And so for students with disabilities, this begins generally with the development of an IEP that is reasonably calculated to enable the child to make appropriate progress in light of the child's circumstances, or what you've probably heard from Andrew. The IEP team, whose members are really outlined in IDEA, are ultimately responsible for its development. So the purpose of today's session, and we can go to the next slide, is to really provide some tools and resources to help you facilitate virtual IEP meetings, and also learn how local implementers are successfully implementing virtual IEP meetings. So many educators may not be aware that prior to COVID, that the IEP team could actually meet with alternative means of participation. And this could have been through video conferences, conference calls, and some of you may have used FaceTime at some point. Now, the use of alternative formats does not change other IDEA requirements of the IEP. The components remain the same, the expectations remain the same. And in fact, no matter the format of the meeting, all required participants, including parents, should be present or appropriately excused from the meeting. Now, prior to COVID, most schools did not frequently use alternative approaches. And if they were used, they were primarily used for an individual person, right, who wasn't able to attend. Now, many viewed alternative approaches as more informal or as a last resort. And so it was often not used as an option for parents or other team members unless there was just no other way for them to be there. And it was very rare that you would see a school say, would you like to meet virtually or would you like to meet face-to-face when working with parents? Schools noted that, some of the reasons is they were just not familiar with the platforms or the comfort level with these alternative approaches. I mean, I'm sure most of you can step back to March and April and feeling overwhelmed with learning about Zoom or Google Meet or GoToMeeting or whatever platform that you were using. So there's also been this preference for face-to-face meetings because there's this feeling of relationship building, which is really critical to the success of students with disabilities. And what we find sometimes is that in virtual environments, some of us worry that it's really hard to pick up on if a parent is upset or if they're unclear or if they want to say something, but they don't know when to interrupt or when to chime in. And finally, I think what we've seen, and this is really highlighted in the spring, is there was this general lack of infrastructure to support virtual meetings, right? A lot of us sort of used our FaceTime on our iPhones because it was there, but most of us did not have access to Zoom or Google Meets prior to the spring, so we couldn't really offer that as an option. Now, what's nice, it's one of the things that might benefit us about the current context is that it's really required us to leverage this alternative approach. And this is something that I think in the end will benefit us both from an educational level and a parent level. If we think about right now, almost half of districts are open to remote learning, which means kids are not coming into the schools, thus parents would not be able to come into those schools. Another 27% of districts are using a hybrid approach, meaning maybe they're doing every other week or every other day, but kids are not fully in one location or the other. There is a small percentage, about 24%, who are engaging in full in-person instruction. But even in those cases, there may be parents who feel that the virtual IEP option is still a safer or better option. Now, we know a lot of schools are moving to a face-to-face beginning in the maybe after November 1st or maybe in January, but we'll still see that virtual meetings are a viable option for our families, those who feel particularly at risk for COVID or other illnesses, those who've struggled with job losses or trying to managing, multiple jobs or caring for folks at home. And in some cases, you may actually have team members who have COVID and are not able to attend your meetings. Now, with this in mind, the Progress Center, in collaboration with multiple OSEP funded centers, including several parent centers, developed a suite of resources, and we can move past this one here, in both English and in Spanish. And what was nice about these resources is it gave us some structure for how we could function within these virtual meeting platforms. Now, the one on the right is a PDF, and it really outlines what a potential agenda might look like. And the resource on the right side is a Word document that can be adapted, right, for your local context, your own logo, your own timings, your own meeting norms, and now, this suite of resources also includes a number of educator and family tip sheets for conducting and participating in a virtual meeting. This is a new way of doing business, so we can't just expect people know how to work within the virtual setting. So these tools really outlined what you would do prior to the meeting, to get ready, to try it out, make sure your hair is fixed, to making sure that you're able to connect and use the audio or share what you want to share, and then finally what happens after the meeting. Now, in the remaining portion of this webinar, we're going to hear from local educators about how they're using these resources or various adaptations to these resources to successfully implement virtual IEPs. Now, before I introduce our speakers on the next slide, I do want to remind folks that you can place tips, your questions in our question box, that after Emily and Dr. Rubenstein share their tips and tricks, we will share some of those questions. Now, Emily Surapaneni, she is our special education process coordinator for Columbia Public Schools in Missouri, and she has been working extensively with educators to really help them navigate this virtual IEP meeting. And then following her, Dr. Rubenstein, who is our assistant superintendent from Student Services in Elmhurst Community Unit School, District 205, will share some of his experiences in our large suburban school. So we're going to go back and we'll get to Emily and we'll pass the slides over to her.
Okay, good afternoon. So I'm Emily Surapaneni. As they said, I work in Columbia Public Schools in Columbia, Missouri, which is right smack in the middle of Missouri and where the University of Missouri, or Mizzou, is located, just to kind of give you a little perspective. We are a big district. We have about 20,000 students, and about 2,000 of those students have IEPs. So just kind of put you in perspective there. We are currently all virtual, except for our students with our most significant needs, so what we would call our district classrooms. We have those in seat. However, we are one of the districts that are starting to look at getting kids more face-to-face, and so we actually have a school board meeting next week, and we'll find out more what that will look like. But so far, we've started off virtual. In our district, every student was provided a device to start the year. They were given iPads if you were in elementary and middle school, and then a laptop for high school. So that just kind of a little background with what we're working with. And students could choose to do virtual for the school year, and also could choose to kind of follow whatever model the district goes to. So whether we're hybrid, face-to-face, or virtual. But there are some students who elected to be virtual for the entire school year. And so we also kind of have to always keep those students in mind. So my particular role, I'm called a process coordinator, which I know in every district is looked at as different. And so I support, there are 5 of us in my district, and we support elementary and middle school. And then our high school department chairs kind of cover their own schools. But we're supporting teachers, we're creating processes, we're relaying information from the district to the building, we're attending difficult meetings, we're acting as LEA as needed, just lots of meetings, lots of kind of distributed information. Okay, and then to start the year, just to prove how much I feel like I am in this, we are amending every single IEP in our district. And so like I said, there's 2,000 of them. And so every IEP is being amended to start the year to either add our distance learning plan, which for us is a Form G, or looking at amending for the virtual. And so lots of paperwork happening, lots of meetings happening, going on there. So I did kind of come up with a list of what I felt like were good practices as we're having a virtual IEP meeting. Some of mine are more related to kind of paperwork or just the setup of the meeting. And so I'm just going to kind of go through those. You can see that there's a tips from the field, like a little handout there that you're welcome to kind of click on and keep for yourself as a reminder. Okay, so first, I would always recommend sending the parent a copy of the draft IEP in an email prior to the meeting. Now, sharing IEPs is always good before, even when we weren't in the virtual world. But what I think is important now is our parents were used to having that paper copy of that IEP, and that's no longer, an option. And so if you can get them that copy of the IEP that they can print out so that they have that paper copy and they can review it, I just really think that helps them feel more comfortable. Not all parents need that, but some do. So I think that's a good way to kind of get things started. One thing that I think is a really good practice is when whoever is setting up the IEP meeting, including a waiting room with your virtual option. So in my district, we use Zoom. I know there are other options that other districts use, but if you have the option to kind of include a waiting room, I find that that's really helpful. Similar to having your family kind of wait in the office with whoever they brought. Did they bring an advocate? Did they bring an outside agency? We have them kind of wait in the office while the team is getting themselves prepared. And when we all are ready, we're like, okay, let's go ahead and let the family in. And so instead of walking down the hall and bringing them in, it's now just having them in the waiting room and then letting them into your virtual meeting. And I just think that kind of helps things go smooth and make sure there's no awkwardness between the members who do show up earlier. So something I think is helpful. One thing I highly recommend is avoiding getting into the IEP system during meetings. And so what I mean by that is, in my district, we use SpedTrack. Okay, I know there's 100,000 of them that people are using. But when you're getting into SpedTrack and you're clicking things and your video is being, your screen is being shared, you never know what other students' names might pop up accidentally. Do you have tabs open at the top of your screen that might have a person's name? And so you really just have to be careful for that confidentiality piece. And so just having all documents that you're going to be using prepared ahead of time, the PDF of the IEP, the behavior intervention plan, the data collection information that you're going to share to show the progress. If you want to show the new rubric or a new probe that you plan to use for your new goal, having that already opened on your computer so that all you have to do is click it and it pops open and you don't have to go find it during the meeting. I also would advise, always putting the IEP in a PDF and sharing that versus actually going into the system and typing in it box by box. And of course, everyone has their own preference, but what I find is for those of you who work, in the IEP system, that not all the boxes print, not all the lines print. It depends on the student's disability, their age, what they need. And so when you're kind of doing it in the system and the parent seeing you kind of skip around and you're not doing everything, it feels like, are you hiding something? Why are you not reviewing that with me? The PDF of the IEP is what they're familiar with, what they typically would get when it is sent home. And so having that pulled up and kind of going through that, to me, makes a lot of sense and is just more familiar and comfortable for the family. Okay, with that said, since you no longer have like that paper copy of the IEP and you're now sharing your screen, I feel like you no longer have that ability to be scribbling down notes as you're going through the meeting. When the parent's giving you the list of concerns and you're hurriedly going through and writing them down, and you know, when you get to your strengths, or oops, oh, I just saw a typo and I'm going to circle that so I know I'm going to go back and do that. So one thing I found that is helpful, and again, this probably can't happen for every meeting because it depends on who's going to be there, but I always like to find and pre-assign what I'm calling a friend in the meeting. And so for that, what I think is helpful, and when I'm attending meetings, I'm often that friend. And so I will actually be in the IEP system, and knowing that not everyone maybe has that access. So maybe they're just taking notes in a Word document or something that they can send you after. But when the parent is saying all the concerns and whatever, and you know, as the case manager, you're not able to write all that and you're feeling a little flustered and you're kind of managing lots of things, it's nice to have that friend who can sit there, type it in, take the notes, and then afterward pass those along to you and say, hey, I updated the strengths, I got most of the parent concerns, you know, read them and make sure that sounds right. And then I caught the typo in the goal and updated that. So that kind of just helps the flow of it. You know, you're not flustered trying to make sure you have all those things ready. So keep that in mind. The other thing that I feel like a pre-assigned friend is helpful for is if you have, if you are sharing your screen, it is difficult for you to run the chat while you are in, you know, your Zoom meeting. And so you're not, you know, you're kind of going through the IEP, you're focused on that as the presenter, as a facilitator. And so you need someone that can watch that chat and can see when the OT says, hey, I have to leave and go to another meeting in 10 minutes. Can I pop in after you? Or you're talking about a goal and somebody kind of is like, ooh, I have an idea for that. What about this? And they maybe didn't want to interrupt you because you were speaking. And so they just typed it. And so you need someone that can kind of say, oh, I'm going to pause you real quick. I just saw that we have a comment that we need to address now. Or wait till there's a pause and then say, hey, you know, the OT does need to leave a little early today. So let's make sure the parent doesn't have any questions before they leave. The other thing that I think is helpful is I've been in a few meetings where, you know, just like in person, you have a few people who are tardy to the meeting, right? So the mom is very adamant that, you know, the counselor is coming to the meeting. I want the counselor there. And it's like, okay, great. We are happy to have them. But we also have to, you know, watch our time. So if the meeting is starting on time, but the counselor is late, we do have to get started. So what I have found that is helpful is, and it might be making a different person the host of the Zoom or whatever you're using, and then they can watch for the meeting room alert to pop up and let them into the meeting. It's kind of, you know, just kind of messes with your flow, and all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, I have to stop sharing, go let in a person, get back to where I was, find where I was, and keep going. And so having someone that can be that friend to kind of help you, I think is a good practice. Another thing that I find, you know, if you guys have been in Zoom meetings, I'm sure you've all seen this, but, you know, whoever created the meeting is the host. And of course, you know, somebody always wants to share who's not the host. Can I share my screen? So here you are, you're in your meeting and somebody wants to share their screen, and then everyone's comfort level is different, but some people are like, oh, how do you do that? And trying to figure it out. So my advice is, if you know during the meeting that someone is probably going to want to share their screen, go ahead and let that set up that security before you even get the meeting rolling. You do have to kind of start the Zoom, and then you have to go to security and let everyone share their screen. But just doing that at the beginning of the meeting, so that it's not you don't have to pause, you don't have to get flustered trying to figure out how to do that. And so I feel like that is helpful. Figuring it out on the fly, you know, never goes as smooth as you hope it will. At least my experience. All right, so getting people to the meeting. So to me, you know, to make it as easy as possible to get school members to your Zoom meeting, we send calendar invites. So like in my district, we use Outlook, but using that Outlook calendar invite, putting that link in there. Right now there are links everywhere, right? You got Google links, we got meeting links, Zoom links, all this. And so just, you know, your teachers are teaching and now they need to like get off that, and they can't run down the hall anymore with their lunch that's heated up and they're eating it during their meeting. Now they have to get off, you know, they're getting out of their class and they are like, oh my gosh, I have to go to a meeting. Where's that link? Well, when that calendar alert pops up and it's just right there and all they have to do is click it, guess what? Everyone's there on time, and it was really easy. So I find that super helpful. When it comes to parents, you can't send them that same calendar and, invite, because they probably, they don't have that calendar that we share as a district. But I do advise, figuring out what's the easiest way to get them that link. Often in our notices of meeting, we put the link in there and, we say, well, the link's there, but it's difficult for them to find that and type that in or whatever. And so knowing your families, should I text them the link because they're just going to be on their phone and that way they just click it and they show up? Do I need to email it? Just figuring out what is the best way for that family to attend. With that said, we know that there are some families that won't be able to attend via Zoom, whether they're not comfortable or it's too difficult for them to figure out how to do it. And so it's totally okay to also have that family attend by phone. I've done several meetings where the parent is on speakerphone with the case manager, and then the rest of us are on Zoom. And I mean, it's a little different and a little challenging because the parent can't see the paperwork, and maybe they can, maybe they pull it up on their phone or the computer, but typically we've been able to hear each other and it's really not been a big problem. So that's always a way to go about it. This of course is related to whatever your district allows, but if you do have a parent that, insists on attending in person, what we have done in our district is, because our staff and administrators are allowed to be in the buildings, just not students, we have said that a parent can come into the building and be like in a room, socially distanced, wearing a mask, with the case manager, and they're in the room, and then the rest of the team Zooms in. And so they're on the computer, and maybe it's on the smart board. And so we all still are participating together, but we kind of got that family member in. And sometimes that's just the hurdle you have to do, to get that person to feel comfortable. So I had a family member who, she was like, I just need to be in. She has 6 foster kids. She was a little bit older, and she's like, I have to be in person. It just helps me. We were like, okay, let's do it. And it, it just kind of helped her with that. Another thing is just when it comes to, Zoom meetings, especially with a lot of people, there's always that awkwardness of how do you introduce everyone, because everyone's order of people is different. And so, there's lots of ways to do it. One way that I find is helpful is whoever is the facilitator, which again is usually the case manager, they just kind of call out, like, oh, and this is our regular education teacher. They introduce themselves. And our LEA today is our process coordinator, introduce themselves, so we just kind of have that person guide the order. And that way it just makes it more smooth, opposed to everyone trying to talk over each other, like who should go next. And I always feel like that creates a little awkwardness. And so that's one way to help. Another thing that's helpful is just making sure your full name is accurately showing on the screen. So, my name is Emily Surapaneni, and so sometimes maybe it would just say Emily or Emily S. or E. Surapaneni. But if I'm a parent coming in, I might say like, I don't know who that is. And so I think it is really helpful to just see the full name, and so that I can actually know like, oh, that's who that person is on my notice of meeting, So just kind of keep that in mind. And then my final thing, as a district, we've kind of really had to think about what can we do electronically when it comes to like signatures, when it comes to permissions. So what we have done, for a record of participants, which is like our sign-in, we've always previously had everyone just, sign in with a signature. We now have that form, and the case managers just type in it, and we upload it and attach it. When it comes to our prior written notices, or notices of action, which is that, action to promote a change to the IEP, we allow, as long as it is not the initial IEP or an evaluation or a reevaluation, we do allow the parent to either give written or verbal permission for us to proceed with the change. And so that's really easy over Zoom to just, we can pull it up and show it to them, and then we say, do you have your verbal permission? Yes, and then we just document it. They can also do that through email. For our releases of information, which is another big one, our district is working on creating an electronic version with that. It's still kind of in the mix, but we plan to do that for those. Okay, so I'm going to pass it to my friend Kevin, and he's going to continue on these great tips and tricks for you.
There we go. So, so as I get started, just a little bit about where my journey is at with our school district. So we actually are bringing in our last group of students to this week. We started with our 8th graders, our juniors, and our seniors. And that caps off a journey that has lasted a little bit over a month now. So we brought in, we have equated it to a slow rollout of our plans. So we started back on September, actually, we started fully remote on August 24th for everybody. And then we started bringing back our students with the most significant disabilities on September 2nd. So of our 8,800 students in the district, we were probably bringing back in around 100 to 150 at that point on September 2nd. And we've slowly built from there. We have, of course, experienced some bumps and bruises and the typical things that you would experience with COVID, I would imagine, including COVID cases and exposures and those sorts of things. And we are learning to navigate that. And so it is a part of being a new assistant superintendent in the district. So if you could move to the next slide, that would be really helpful. And we'll go on with sort of our tips and tricks here. So what do I recommend? I would say that one of the best things that I have ever done, and it's actually a best practice related to IEPs out there, is using the facilitated IEP process. So there are several companies and organizations that do training related to facilitated IEPs and using their process. But what I have found most often is that the facilitated IEP process helps to keep teams focused on what's important, which is the student, and you make sure that you have clear roles for every single group member. So like Emily was saying before, that you want to appoint somebody who's going to be a note taker and somebody who's going to watch the chat. You're also going to want to make sure that you have somebody who's going to watch the body language of people who are, you know, listening in and just participating in the meeting, so that you can, just like you typically would in a regular IEP meeting, so that you are actually able to make sure that this is really going well, or that you can actually sort of, quote, read the room and make sure that you do that well. The facilitated IEP process actually comes with a set of norms, and you can adjust those norms, but you get agreement on the norms at the beginning of the meeting. And I think that in today's age of COVID, as you are doing lots of Zoom meetings, that sometimes people just lose their manners a little bit. And so setting norms for the meeting about, are we going to have our cameras on or off? Are we going to all mute ourselves? Are we going to, you know, like, what's going to be the process if we all get booted and lose the technology? Those sorts of things become some of the added norms that we use for the meeting. So like I said, those are not parts of the typical process for the norms. So you may need to alter the process slightly to fit this format, but certainly you're going to do that and use this facilitated IEP process to your advantage there. You want to know when to share your screen, because so there's a part of the facilitated IEP process where the entire team sort of plots out a student's strengths and what's working for the student, and then plots out the areas for growth and what needs to be developed for that student. And so you're going to want to sort of walk through when exactly you're going to be sharing your screen, what you're going to be sharing on your screen. Is it going to be a Google Doc? Is it just going to be, like Emily said, is it just going to be your IEP system? Is that going to be confusing to people? Think that through ahead of time. And practice really makes perfect. So you're going to want to make sure that, for instance, on this GoToWebinar platform, when I move to my left, I'm actually moving to the right on the screen here. And so you're going to want to make sure that you sort of think that through for those of you who are new to platforms, and think through exactly what that looks like, and think through exactly how things are going to look on the screen. Do it from a participant's perspective, say things out loud, read things out loud, know how it's going to come across. The other thing that I think that the facilitated IEP process does is that Emily talked about sending paperwork home in advance. So in Illinois, that's actually a law. So we are required by law to send home paperwork in advance, 3 days in advance of the meeting. While a lot of teams started to struggle with that, and were sort of caught off guard by it, people who were already using the facilitated IEP process were not, because that is a good practice to have already. So we were sending home the paperwork in advance. This year in my current district, we had this in my last district, we're adding the process of making sure that you check in with a parent with a phone call to sort of clear the decks and make sure that the parent knows how to log into the meeting, make sure that things are going well. Our rule in my last district, and I'm trying to instill it in my new district here, is that if you can sense with the family that there is just something that is not right, or that there's going to be a lot of conflict, we don't want to have a lot of conflict at an IEP meeting. And so if we can sort of clear the decks ahead of time, or if we need to delay an IEP meeting so that we can have some side meetings or some side conversations with the family to do some problem solving, then let's do that. So really check in with families early and often as a part of this process, because families often think that things are sort of out there, and especially when if their student is virtual, they are thinking that maybe they are not seeing their case manager, or if they are only in person. So our students are in person right now 2 days a week. So they feel like maybe they're getting less instruction. And so we have to sort of pick up the slack there a little bit. So if we want to move on to the next slide, and in terms of what I would talk about here is to just be intentional about everything. So think through exactly what those introductions look like. Just as Emily was talking about, making sure that everybody knows to give an introduction. So if I change my name in the chat box here to just be K Rubenstein, is my name really Krubenstein, or is it, is it something else? Who am I, and why was I invited to the meeting? And secondly, we also want to make sure that the parent actually feels welcome, that there's somebody there just like they were at an IEP meeting, that there is somebody there who knows them and welcomes them into a room, and now in the era of COVID, sort of gives them an elbow bump and sort of lets them know that they're here. So we want to say, I'll start out the introductions here. I'm going to pass it to the parents who are, Mr. and Mrs. Wolfram, and then Mr. and Mrs. Wolfram, you can pass it to whoever you would like to, that sort of thing. So you're going to want to think through those introductions and maybe get that going just as a typical team norm that you have. You're going to want to think about how are you going to get items signed. So there are lots of companies, of course, that already had some DocuSigns and ways to sign items. In the spring, we did some documentation just in the IEP that there were some things that needed to be signed, and so we did that virtually and sent it to the parents virtually. That takes time, but you're going to want to think through all of that in advance. What happens if you need to take a break? Are you going to use the same meeting link? Do people close their windows? Do people turn off their cameras? What does that really look like? While all of us are becoming used to living in this space related to Zoom and Google Hangouts and GoToWebinar and that sort of thing, it may not be so typical for somebody else who is not so used to this. And so we need to make that really intentional. I already talked about sort of when do you share your screen? Again, think through that. Go through your IEP meeting agenda and think through exactly when you're going to share your screen, when you're not going to share your screen. How's your language interpretation going to work? Is your language interpreter going to be there on the phone? Are they going to be there on the screen? Are they going to, where is that going to take place? How is that going to happen? Do they have the call-in line? What does that really look like? And just be intentional about that. And then do you have captioning available if needed? So Zoom just added within the last week to week and a half, a really great captioning feature. Google and their captioning feature has already been a part of that, but you need to sort of activate some of these things, and you don't want to be scrambling in your meeting to turn it on and make sure that everybody has it and that the parents can access it, or that a team member can access it, and have people staring at you while you are trying to run the meeting. So do you have captioning available if needed, and how does that work? And do you know what happens if the captioning doesn't work, and do you have a backup? So just be intentional about those things. So next slide. So have a backup plan for everything. So in a typical world, when a meeting runs over in person, your administrative assistant who is sitting out in the office is able to say, wow, Dr. Rubenstein really likes to talk. And so he is, so this meeting must be running over. And so the parents are just sitting out there chit-chatting with your administrative assistant and in the office. Well, in the Zoom world, that is not always possible. And so you need to think through what's going to happen if you have meetings back to back and one of your meetings runs over, because the parents for that meeting that is supposed to be scheduled at 3:15 when your meeting is running over, may be thinking, why is this person not letting me in? This school is always locking me out. It's causing really bad feelings. And so you just want to, again, have a backup plan for that. So who's going to go and check them in? Who's going to go and greet them there in the waiting room? Maybe it really is still your administrative assistant. Maybe that's another job that we had when we were doing some interviews over the summer. We still had our administrative assistant in human resources actually greet our candidates in the waiting room while all of us were in another interview, sort of waiting there for everybody. So we just want to make sure that we do that. We had one of the things that happens, of course, is that Zoom goes down, or things like that happen. So what happens if Zoom goes down, or your power goes out, or the internet goes out, or something along those lines? I have had the unfortunate experience right here in this office of having a literal tornado go like right around the corner while we were negotiating with our teachers union on Zoom about COVID. And so like, what happens if Zoom goes down? And what happens if you're right up against the deadline? What like, think through all of those things and have a backup plan. Is there another platform that you could use? Is there a Google Hangout link that you could always use? So you got to think through all of that stuff and just make sure that you've got it in your back pocket if needed. What happens if the parent can't access the platform? So Sometimes your Zoom platform is set up so that only people in your school district can access it. Sometimes things happen so that, only people from a certain area code can access that number or what have you. So what happens if the parents can't access your platform? What are you going to do then, and how are you going to get them in, or can you patch them through somehow? So just think through that there. A lot of times in really tough IEP meetings, I really will sort of call a time out and say, let's just take 5 minutes and we're going to go and just talk with each other. And so I will use that as a strategy to break some tension. So do you need breakout rooms? Is this a really high pressure, high stress IEP meeting? And if so, do you have the capacity to break people into breakout rooms at a moment's notice, and just make sure that you've got that going on there? And then what if the team is the only one on screen and the parents are participating on the phone? What does that really look like? Are you guys going to be making funny faces at each other? Like, how does that, like, what does that really look like? Think through, have a backup plan for all of those sorts of things. So next slide there. I think that I've got one more slide. So just use this to support the process. So think about how you can use the private chats to support a coaching conversation. So I have a couple of new assistant principals working in my district. So how could we support them by participating in a meeting and maybe giving some feedback? So engaging with a quiet team member to say, hey, what are your thoughts here? I need for you to speak up, to check in with others about the process. So I use that at the beginning of the year to say, to a principal, is your building ready to bring the student in tomorrow, when the parent was begging for that? How could you use technology to, ensure that all team members are heard, or support the process of gathering feedback from the families? So think through, like, maybe we have a shared Google Doc to gather, all of the strengths and areas for growth, where we typically are sort of charting and doing that in front of the room. Maybe this is a collaborative process where everybody's just typing on a Google Doc. Maybe that's what that looks like here as a part of your IEP meeting, now doing it this way. So just think through how we could really use this process. I think that there are some really distinct advantages that all of this technology could actually bring to parents and families and to us that are really pretty exciting. So just think through that, because we never know. Somebody asked a question in advance, like, what happens if you have an attorney at your meeting, and how does that work? So I think one of your norms could be that you, as the facilitator, are going to mute everybody, and if you would like to be called upon, then you need to raise your hand, right? And what a dream world that you, as the facilitator, get to be the one to unmute everybody, right? So I would love to do that in IEP meetings. So in real IEP meetings. And so those are the sorts of things that we just, if that's a norm that the team adopts, that's a possibility to sort of, you're in a new space here. So how do we use this to support your process here? Just think through those things in advance. So with that, I think that we are going to take some questions.
Yeah, so I want to thank you, Emily and Kevin, for sharing your tips about successful virtual meetings. And it seems like a lot of those things can also translate to your face-to-face IEP meetings. And one thing I sort of gathered is it does take some planning to really facilitate this. So you can't really wing it, that we've got to have our norms in place. We've got to have the sort of pre-planning work to make sure folks have their materials to participate. I do want to share a couple of participants actually were sharing their own strategies. I know Patricia shared, making sure any documents you send home have the watermark for draft, so that folks know it's not the final, that you're just giving them something tangible to hold. And this idea of checking for understanding or stopping, right, to see if folks are with you. I know we found in Zoom meetings that people tend to watch themselves when they talk as opposed to other participants. So having some of those formal stops and, check to see if we're okay before we continue to move on. And finally, and this builds on what Emily shared, is when you're putting your name, is maybe also put your role, because the parent may not really know that you're the occupational therapist or you're the new school psychologist. So name and role might actually make that a little bit easier to really understand who's at the meeting. Now, we did get a lot of questions actually about parent signatures, and both of you addressed this, but we want to be clear from the Progress Center that IDEA does not require a parent sign an IEP in order for it to be implemented. So you want to make sure that you're checking with your state about what are the requirements and what's the guidance coming from your state, because as you heard today, each state has different expectations. Now, we did have some questions, and Kevin, I'm going to give this first one to you because of your current role. Have you applied these same recommendations to 504 meetings?
Sure. So I don't get to be in a lot of 504 meetings these days, but they very easily could be applied to 504 meetings. I think that good meeting practices and good parent collaboration practices are, good across the board. And it really has to do with building relationships with parents and families. And that starts with, I was actually talking about this with our team yesterday, that really starts with making sure that the annual review or the meeting itself is not the only time that we're having a conversation with the family about that student. And so if it is, then everything is going to be riding on that meeting. And so if we can sort of spread our communication out to maybe once a month with that family about what's going on with those students, and checking in with that family once a month, even if it's just an email, opening up the door to sort of say, hey, I saw Kevin in class today. He looked really attentive. I just wanted to check in with you about how that accommodation that we put into place at the last 504 meeting was going. From your perspective, could you just send me some information? It's going to open a door. Or we can schedule a phone call. It's going to open a door, because the more of those little events that we can sort of string together, the better off we're going to be in the long run. But it's really about building those parent relationships that are going to help us to have a better process.
Excellent. So Emily, I'm wondering if you can share just some of your tips for when your Zoom does go out. Do you have any strategies that you use in your district?
That's a good question. I personally have not had that happen. Kevin maybe is the one who has. I don't know. The tornado down the street was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But I would say, whether you have to reschedule that meeting, I mean, your timelines are always can get you there. So that's why you always have to give yourself plenty of time. But, whether you're rescheduling or just trying to reconnect through phone, getting everyone on speakerphone, if that's possible, trying to get the parent and kind of seeing what they prefer. Some parents are going to say, nope, I need everyone together again. I want to see it. I want to do this again. So it's really whatever their preference is and whatever, feels comfortable for them, I think.
Yeah.
And then what are you all doing about cameras during your meetings? Are you requiring those, or are you leaving it optional?
We are leaving it optional. We are not requiring it. I do think, for families to see us at least is helpful, so that they can see our faces and see who we are is nice. But we do not have like a mandatory or that expectation that it has to be done.
Yeah, required for staff, optional for families, obviously. One of the things that I forgot to point out is that while we are in person, the state board has really still strongly encouraged all meetings to be virtual if at all possible. So
Same with us. We will continue to maintain, I think, virtual meetings, even if our kids are coming back.
Yep.
So how are you all addressing student privacy or FERPA within your virtual IEP meetings?
Yeah, so it is interesting. So that's like a whole new realm for all of us, I think. So first of all, the student privacy.
And I'll just interrupt you real quick for a second. For those, I did put the link from the U.S. Department of Ed around FERPA and virtual experiences in the chat box.
Yeah, so the U.S. Department of Ed and the Student Privacy Office has, I won't say loosened their restrictions, but they have issued some guidance around this in the spring, and really just sort of said that we need to make sure that we're observing the rules and doing the best we can, but that, that they understand that there's going to be some challenges with that. So I think that when you are, that your tech team, who are experts at this, when they're investigating a platform like Zoom, like Google Hangouts, like those sorts of things, that they're the ones that you're going to need to work with to make sure that your platform is, FERPA compliant, that it is, thoroughly encoded and all of those other sorts of things. And so that you're able to move forward from there.
Well, I want to just see if there's any last minute things that you all want to share before we formally close up.
Emily?
Overall, I mean, it's actually gone better than back in March when this was going to be a reality. It's been okay. I think having to share your screen, especially for when you have those bigger IEP meetings, it kind of forces everyone to look at the same thing. I've loved it when creating like behavior intervention plans for families, because normally I think you just kind of are talking about it and you're referencing a document, but like when everybody has to see it and you're kind of walking through, I really do think it's pretty powerful. Like it forces everyone to see the same thing, and I think that's really good.
Yeah. So I also think that it is really helpful because the parents are participating in their home turf. You're participating in your home turf. I can participate from my office, which is comfortable to me. I don't have to go anywhere, move my stuff. I can be wherever I need to be in order to have an IEP meeting. And it's the same thing for the families. And so I think that that is really comforting. So
Great.
Well, I'd like to personally thank both of you for sharing your experiences and tips and tricks today for conducting virtual IEP meetings. And if you all want to learn more about conducting virtual IEP meetings, we have Emily's tip sheet that she shared, and we have a bunch of other resources available on the Progress Center website at promotingprogress.org. I also want to remind you that the IEP resources, virtual IEP resources, can be adapted for your local context. So you may decide that based on needs, you want to have more time for a particular agenda item, or you want to modify the meeting roles or the names of your meeting to align with your system. But you can also create new supplemental documents. And so if you look at the document on the right-hand side, this is an example of where a team at parents' suggestion created a note-taking resource that aligned with the agenda, that the parent could type her notes or write her notes in preparation, right? That they were coming prepared for what they wanted to talk about in each of those agenda items. And one of the parents had indicated it helped her feel more prepared for the meeting and that her voice was heard in the development of that IEP. I also want to share on the website, we just released yesterday IEP tip sheets to help you in the development of the actual IEP during your IEP meeting and keep you focused on what matters most in promoting progress for kids with disabilities. And I want to share one last resource, and this is something new that's coming out of two of our centers. This is a great resource for supporting families and working with their kids at home. It is a supplemental resource. It aligns with our partner in the Cedar Center, and it's helping with an at-home learning. So those of you working in virtual learning platforms and you're partnering with parents, this is something you might bring up at the IEP meeting to help build their capacity to really help implement these supports across the school and the home environment. So it was developed by Tiffany Hunt and Richard Carter at the University of Wyoming. And the way you access it is you just get to your Alexa and you say, Alexa, open home learning, and it'll walk you through. And finally, we are all learning together the best way to maximize virtual IEPs. I think it's a new learning process each time. If you have tips, tricks, and suggestions for implementing, keep them coming. Tag us on Twitter or Facebook. And then we'll share your tips and tricks and add them to our resources. If you want to stay up to date, we also have a regular newsletter, and we will be releasing new resources over the next couple of months to help you in your journey in both virtual and face-to-face supports for students with disabilities. And I'd like to thank our wonderful presenters for sharing their wisdom, and our audience for sharing your thought-provoking questions. I want to remind you is that please complete our survey about the webinar so that we can better meet your needs in the future. So please have a wonderful day, and thank you, Emily and Kevin.